Hello there. Hi. Good time zone, everyone. Mostly Flavius. Hi there. Um, so, for today, I have a little plan that mostly involves making a game, of course. But this time, I am going to keep it kind of like a tutorial, hopefully, as I am partaking in the Captain Coder's Learn You a Game Jam 2024. So, hopefully this is going to be kind of like a little tour as well, as in how things work in the game engine that I use, which is Construct 3. I'm going to make everything from scratch and talk a little bit about the inner workings of the engine, but hopefully not too much. So the gems theme is only one inventory slot, which is a really good one. So basically I figured that I should probably make a little shooter game, kind of like a Nuclear Throne or something, but you only have one weapon at any one point. That is the plan. So basically it's going to be a twin stick shooter, and I really hope that I'm not going to say basically that much, because I watched back a previous recording of one of my streams and whoa, I say basically way too freaking often. So yeah. In any case, I'm going to get started right now. So for those of you who might watch this as a video on YouTube, because I'm going to upload it later, I am just going to quickly say a few things about this engine, but really just a quick glance. So Construct 3 is a game engine that is basically mostly for 2D game development. It does have some 3D features, but they are super basic ones. But the main difference between this and Godot, Unity, Unreal Engine, and stuff like this is that it completely runs in the browser. So let me just pull up the official site. So this is construct.net, and the software, the game engine, the editor, lives in editor.construct.net. So you just open this in basically any browser. Oops, once again. Mostly Chromium browsers are going to be the best experience, because they tend to have the best performance. And there you go, you just get started right there. So you can also install them as a progressive web app if you are running Chromium, and that's what I'm doing. So this will be the window that I'm using, but this is also just Chromium in kind of full screen mode. So it's exactly the same as using it like this in a browser. And as I mentioned, it's mostly a 2D engine. And I'm going to make a completely 2D game, a top-down shooter, as I already mentioned, and I'm just going to build it from scratch. So let's get started. At first, I'm going to click New and enter Stream Game. Then I can select a little preset which just sets the viewport size. I'm going to stick with this. This is all right. And I'm not going to go any details at this point. I might do later. So this is how the editor looks like. I'm going to resize stuff a little bit, and I think I'm also going to try to zoom in so it's more readable on my stream as well, or in the video. So this is where you get started. In Construct, there are two types of tabs that are already open when you open up a new project. One of it is a layout that is kind of like the level that you're on, or where you're going to add objects. This is a completely visual drag and drop type deal. And there are also event sheets. This is where the programming happens. But in Construct, you can also utilize a bunch of behaviors that you can assign to objects, which are a little bit like classes, I guess. So for example, if you have an object, a little sprite, and you want it to move as a top-down character, for example, or maybe a side view platformer character, then you can just assign a certain behavior to it, and then it will have a bunch of actions that are kind of like methods that inherit from this behavior, and it will make your life a lot easier. So I am going to get started, and for this project I'm going to use programmer art mostly. So I'm going to draw circles and squares and stuff like this right in Construct. I'm not going to bother with any assets, imports or stuff like this, but later I might swap them, because if I don't, it's going to look horrendous. So yeah, Flavius, that's a good question. I considered doing Godot for the jam, but then in the end I figured that I'm just going to stick with something that I know, and kind of, instead of learning something new, I'm going to make content that might help others make something similar, or at least just have a few tutorials for Construct, because there are not so many Construct resources, tutorials, stuff like this on YouTube, for example. So hopefully this will turn into something that might be useful for people who want to try an engine that is kind of easy to get started with. I mean, I think it's a lot easier to get started with compared to Godot and Unity and stuff like this, but yeah, it's different. So at first, I'm going to add a player object. I can do this by right-clicking and selecting Insert New Object, for example. And there are a bunch of object types. These are kind of like the nodes in Godot. So I'm going to select Sprite and click somewhere. So I insert it, and then this animation editor comes up. At first, it starts for some reason with this 250 by 250 canvas. I'm just going to resize this to something smaller, like 32 by 32. And the usual deal is that I draw a circle, which is just a white circle, nothing more. I'm going to use this integrated sprite editor or animation editor. And I'm also going to draw a little line right here. So we will see which way the sprite is facing. By default, when you make something in Construct, they start at the 0 degrees, which means they are looking to the right, basically. God damn it. I have to stop saying that word. Okay, so this is the basic sprite that I have. There's an origin point right at the middle. If I want, I could move it, and this just means that the midpoint of the sprite will change, but I'm going to use quick assign middle to reset it back to the center. Then I could also define a collision polygon, so the hitbox essentially. I could draw some shapes using these points to make it like I don't know, a hexagon or something, or I could do something like right-clicking and say guess the polygon shape, and Construct usually has a pretty good idea about the shape of the sprite. So it's possible to have this little hitbox automatically created. So that's about it. I'm going to close this, and now I have a object called sprite right here. Now, one of the first things that I do when starting from scratch is to also make some changes to the project's properties. So if I click right here at the top of the tree, this is my whole project's main property view or something. And I'm going to turn off pixel rounding. I'm also going to check a few things. These are mostly fine. But I'm also going to set some properties on this layout that I'm on at this point. It's possible to have a little grid. I can turn it on, and then it shows up like this. If I zoom in a little bit, then it's a little bit better. And I can also say that I want this grid to be a snappy one. So I can just move objects on a, for example, now 2x2 grid. I'm going to turn off the grid's visibility, but I'm going to keep this snap right now. So in Construct, the positioning stuff works like I think in most game engines, but not all. So top left corner is 0, 0, and if I move something to the right, then the X position, the X coordinate changes, it increases, and if I move it down, then the Y coordinate changes, and you can check those right here. Similarly, here's size, it's all in pixels at this point. And there's also angle. Construct doesn't do things in radians, it just uses degrees. There's also opacity, color, which is a color overlay, essentially a tint. I can set a color and then it applies it on top of the original sprite. So if I have something in white, for example, like this object, then I can just apply a tint and make it a different color. So yeah. There are also layers. Right now there's only one layer. I'm going to make it into my main layer, and yeah. Also about this layout stuff, I'm going to check chat in 1 second. So just about this layout stuff, the layout that I'm on is actually 4 times, or I mean, yeah, it's basically four times as big as my project's viewport. So when I started the project, I selected this 640 by 360 viewport, and if I click here, which just selects the layout, then it's possible to see that the size is actually twice the width and twice the height. I'm going to change this to here and get rid of the rest of the layout for now. And check chat. So, yeah, the shirt is a good one. By the nerds. You got yours as well. That's neat. I'm considering getting a mug as well, so I have the whole collection. But yeah. Add a counter on the stream that counts how many times you say it. Yeah, this I could probably do. It's horrible to listen to anyway. This is definitely not great for a drinking game. Every time I say basically don't drink, unless maybe if you want to drink water, that's fine. But yeah. If you upload this to YouTube, I'm gonna cut the parts. Yeah, no, that's totally fine. This is intentionally a stream that is going to also serve as a tutorial, so feel free to chat anytime and possibly ask questions or say anything you want. Flavius, don't keep it to yourself just because I'm kind of making a tutorial. It's kind of a tutorial and not a proper tutorial anyway. So yeah. Emo Giraffe. Hello, first time here, sending regards from Egypt. Nice. I am streaming from Hungary, quite a bit away from there. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I'm just starting, I just started a couple minutes ago, and I'm making a little top-down shooter for the Captain Coder's Learn New Game Jam. So if you're interested in this sort of thing, feel free to stick around. Okay, so where was I? Okay, I have my little sprite on the layout. I have a single layer called main, and I'm going to rename this sprite to player, because this is going to be the player sprite that is going to move around. And I think we can probably do that right now, the movement. So I mentioned earlier that there are behaviors in construct, which are essentially classes that make objects do things. And to add the behavior, you just click here, click add new behavior, and under movements, there are a bunch of options. For now, I'm going to add a direction, and just like this, now there are some other properties like max speed, acceleration, deceleration, and stuff like this. And right now, if I just run the game by pressing F4, as you see, this is also, of course, running in a browser. This just opened a new window and ta-da. So if I now press the arrow keys, then my player is already moving around, and this just happened. I didn't have to code anything. This is just because of how the a direction behavior works by default. So if I press the arrow keys, as you can see, the player object is moving around, it's turning as well, so it's changing the angle. If you don't want that, then you can set this set angle property to no, and in this case the movement will be the same, but the sprite won't be rotated. So that's just the difference. And the arrow keys work because this default control stuff is checked in. If I remove it then and run the game, then the object doesn't respond to any keys. So to respond to some other keys, for example, I probably want to have the player move with the WASD keys and the arrow keys as well. So I'm just going to keep the default controls checkbox turned off. And I think I am going to add keyboard controls for now. But the plan is to also have gamepad controls and possibly keyboard and mouse controls, because this is going to be a shooter, so the player will have to move and also shoot, and this could happen in different directions as well. So on the gamepad, I'm just going to use the analog sticks and also the D-pad for movement. The left analog stick and the D-pad will be for moving the player, and the right analog stick will be for shooting in completely different direction optionally. So to do that, I am going to add some more objects, which are not objects like the player, not the sprite. These are just special objects that are global, special, once again, classes, basically. So you can add gamepad, keyboard, and mouse input as well, and touch if you want. So I'm just going to do, I think, all of that at at this point. I'm just going to add keyboard. I'm also going to add gamepad. And yeah, while I'm at it, I'm also going to add the mouse and also the touch objects. And these don't show up anywhere in the layout. They are just added right here. But I do like to keep things tidy, so I'm going to create a subfolder for these under object types, and I'm going to call these inputs. And I can just select these, move them to this folder, and mostly forget about them, so they don't show up here. So under object types, I can also create a new subfolder. I usually do stuff like utilities. And under utilities, I tend to have once again, a special object called browser. And this object will allow me to do things like toggling full screen mode and logging to the console, because, you know, the game is running in the browser, so you can access the browser console as well, the developer console. So I'm just going to move the browser object to utilities, and I will show you a little bit later why this is important, or even why did I do that. So right now, okay, we have a sprite which doesn't move because I disabled the default controls. So I'm just going to go over the event sheet, which I am going to rename as well. I'm going to call it main at this point. And this layout that I have, I think I'm going to call it level. And if I click this layout, then on the left side, there are the properties, and there's only one event sheet for each layout. So right now the main event sheet is assigned to the level layout, which is fine. So if I run this layout, then it means that everything that is in the main event sheet is going to run. So I'm going to give you a little tour how programming is done in Construct right now. So Construct is mostly a visual programming environment, although you can use JavaScript and TypeScript as well if you want, if you prefer coding, but I usually don't. So I'm just going to stick with events now. And events are made out of two parts, conditions and actions. I'm just going to show you an example, and hopefully it will be clear how things work. So I can probably use the mouse to right click and say add event, but there are keyboard shortcuts as well. I'm just going to press E, which has the same result if I click add event. And to add an event, I first need to create a condition. And for the condition that I want to create is while the player is pressing the W button, for example, then I want the player sprite to behave like I would press the up key while the default controls are on. This is a little bit contrived, I know, but basically I want the player to move upwards. So first, I'm going to add the condition for the keyboard. I'm just going to start typing key, and already the keyboard object is selected. I'm going to press enter. And right here, these are the conditions that are related to the keyboard object. So for example, the most common things that you could use is on key pressed, which is for detecting little short key presses. But if you want something that works while a key is held down, then you would want key is down. So this is what I'm going to add. And in the third part of this condition, wizard or something, you can select which key you want to monitor. So I can press space or I can click this, and then I can just press the key that I want to monitor. In this case, let's start with W. And I'm going to press enter a couple of times, and boom, here's the first event. And it's mostly, I think, kind of readable. So this event just says that keyboard W is down, and then there are some actions, hopefully. I mean, not yet, but I am going to add one. You can either click add action with the mouse, or you can also, if you have this event selected, you can press A for actions, and then you can open up this action wizard. And this is where you tell construct what should happen if the W key is down. So in this case, I want the player to move upwards. And for this, I'm going to select player. And the player has a bunch of actions. I'm not going to go through all of these right now. But for the A direction behavior that we added, these are the actions. And in this case, I just want to say simulate control, which is a little weird, I think, but it will be quite obvious what it does. It just essentially tells the sprite's A direction behavior that the sprite should move in a direction. In this case, I'm going to say control up. And I am going to copy this event by clicking the left side of it and press Ctrl C once and Ctrl V 3 more times. And just make some changes to these events. So I'm just going to replace either with the mouse or the keyboard. You can go through these and make the changes. So the W, S, A, and A keys respond to the relevant directions of this simulate A direction action. So I have the 4 keys set up, so now if I run the game, then hopefully if I press the WASD keys, I can once again move my little sprite. And I think I'm going to restore this set angle behavior like this, just so we can see that the sprite actually changes its direction. So it always faces in the direction of the movement. So yeah, this is basically the player's movement controller kind of done. I mean, it's only a part, but yeah. I am going to save this right here. And I do like to make builds quite often on stream, so I'm just going to click menu, export, and select web. And this will build a web version of the game, HTML, JavaScript, CSS files, the images. It's all done automatically by Construct. So I'm just going to press next. And in a few seconds, hopefully, my PC is not very fast, by the way, this little zip is generated that I can click and then save somewhere. So the directory that I'm going to save it in is right here. And I'm just going to replace this because I already tested the build pipeline, so to speak. I'm just going to overwrite this zip file, and I do have a little batch file right here next to it. I'm just going to show you the contents if my PC doesn't melt to the table. So this just calls the Butler program, which is the itch CLI, to push streamgame.zip to this channel, basically, which is, oh, God damn it, which is, this is my username on itch, and this is the game's URL or the slug on itch, and this is the channel, and then there's a little pause, and that's it. So if I run this, then hopefully the game will update on itch right about now. I'm just going to wait for it. Okay, it's done, I guess. I am going to check on it by opening Chromium and opening up the stream game URL. So itch already detected that there's a new version, so this little loader shows up the first time I'm opening the page. And right now, oh yeah, the construct splash screen is still selected, but yeah, never mind that. So right now the game is up on itch, and I can click the window to focus it and just use the WASD keys to move around. So yeah, it works exactly like it does in the editor. So this I'm going to do a couple of times during the stream or the video. Okay, I'm switching back to right here, and I'm going to go into the project properties because I did notice this splash screen. I don't really promote usually that the game is made with construct. So you can just, if you are not using the free version, you can just select, for example, progress bar only. So the loader will be just a little, I think, white progress bar on black background or something. You can also select the first layout specifically. I'm going to select level, although the default one is probably the first one in the layouts folder anyway. And also, what I want to change is this full screen mode. I'm going to set it to letterbox scale, but first I'm going to show you what's the difference between the default letterbox integer scale and the letterbox scale. So if I run the game and if I resize the window, then you can see that it resizes but in increments, and these increments are integer increments, and this makes sure that pixels don't get scaled with fractional numbers. But I usually just use this. If I run the game again, now it's resizing to whatever the viewport is. I mean the window viewport is. So yeah, I'm going to keep it like this, and also I am going to save it. Right, so let me just bring up this little to-do list, by the way, that I made earlier. So the game is going to be a top-down 2D shooter. The player can move and shoot in different directions. I'm going to use programmer art, and you already saw what this means, basically circles. And the game is going to have multiple weapons, but only one inventory slot, because this is the restriction of the game jam. There's going to be multiple enemies. They will have some super basic physics-based movement. I'm going to tackle this later, possibly another day. Right now, today, I just want to make the player's movement and shooting controls work. The game is going to be multi-platform. It's only going to be a web build, and it will support keyboard only, keyboard and mouse, and gamepad, and also touchscreen input methods, hopefully. And maybe there's going to be a little addition of a multiplayer mode, so there are more than one player objects in the game, but this I may or may not do once again. So let's just go back a little bit, but at first I'm going to check on chat. Willis in the background, Flavius, go ahead, feel free to do anything. I just appreciate that you are here. Going to work on my game. I want to get the portal and pickups done. Nice. Portals, okay, that sounds exciting. By the way, I learned that if I want to do coyote time, I have to remove the double jump. Apparently the double jump overrides coyote time. Okay, this is probably a little Godot specific behavior, but interesting. So for those of you who don't really know about coyote time, it's in platformers when you go off a ledge with the player and you press the jump button a little bit too late and the player is already not on the ground, then this little coyote time behavior might kick in certain games where they implemented it. And this just allows the player to jump off from the air, basically, for a little while after they moved away from an edge. So this is what Flavius was talking about. And I've never done that, actually, coyote time, but I might do. It's at one point if I ever make a platformer game. I mean, I have made a platform game in the past, and I think, maybe experiment with a little addition of coyote time in that as well. This may or may not happen later, but yeah. Right, okay. In any case, Flavius, thanks for lurking. The double jump does the same thing. Yeah, I mean, exactly. Double jump means that you can jump after you go off the ledge once, right? Until you hit the ground again. So yeah, I usually just go with double jump. I made a little clone of Super Crate Box at one point, and I just added double jump because it's fun. So yeah, oops, that was OBS. Okay, right. Okay, I was in the wrong project for a second, but now I'm back at this that I started making. So okay, this player object already has a little basic movement, but I am going to spice things up a little because I actually don't really want to use these simulate actions for the player controller. So I'm just going to think about how I should make it so it works with keyboards and also gamepads, and at one point with touch. But touch I think I'm going to add later. So I already added the gamepad input object. So one option, if I want to keep using these actions, got us in the wind on Discord with what nice. I'm going to check right after I stop streaming. So thanks for that. Okay, so right now I'm just going to show you the quick and easy way to add gamepad, D-pad input support for the game. You could say that this event block or the condition part of it should be an OR block, which means that you can have multiple conditions for the same event, and instead of them working in as conditions that should happen simultaneously, you can opt in to change it to an OR block, which means that if either of the conditions are met, then the action part of the event will run. So I'm just going to select these and select make OR block, and then I can add another condition for these events. You can do this by the mouse, but as I said, I kind of prefer using the keyboard, so I just press C to add another condition for the selected event, and I'm just going to say gamepad, and I'm going to select is button down, which is very similar to the one that we added for the keyboard. And for gamepad, we need to select which gamepad, because I think the browser supports at least 4, possibly more gamepads. I'm not so sure. And these are, this parameter just tells the game which gamepad to interact with. So 0 is the first gamepad that you connected, 1 is the second gamepad. It's 0 indexed, just like a bunch of things in programming and in construct as well. So for gamepad 0, I want to monitor the D-pad up button. And as you can see, the little, firewall, the little red OR word is added. If I change the event type to AND block, then it disappears. But this would also mean that I have to press the D-pad up button on my gamepad and the W as well on the keyboard, just to make the player move upwards, which I really don't want. So I'm just going to change this back to the OR version, and I'm going to copy and paste this part, the condition, to the other other 3 events, and I'm just going to change those by double clicking them and selecting the right direction right about here. Okay, so done. I'm gonna save, and I'm going to run the game and check if it works. So now if I press the D-pad, it doesn't work yet, but there's a good possibility there's something wrong with my gamepad. So let me just check on it first. Oh yeah, it doesn't show up for some reason. This is an issue that I sometimes have. I'm just going to disconnect the receiver and connect it again. Bear with me for one moment. Press a few buttons on the gamepad, and okay, now it shows up in this little stuff, and yeah, it seems to be working now. Okay, so now I run the game and start pressing the D-pad buttons, and it's already working. Yeah. Although if I press the analog stick, of course it does nothing because I haven't handled that yet. But the D-pads work, which is nice. However, I am going to change things up a little because I do want to add the analog input support as well. And for this, I'm going to add another event. I could either click this or just press E on the keyboard and say something like gamepad and compare axis. And with this, I can compare the axis of either the left or the right analog sticks. You can select it here. I'm going to start with the left analog x-axis, and I'm just going to say if it does not equal to 0, which means that it's not centered, then something should happen. And this is once again for the first gamepad, so gamepad 0. I'm going to add this, and I'm also going to copy this whole event, and this time I'm going to change it to left analog y-axis. So this is the left-right movement, and this is the up-down movement. And I think I'm going to change things up a little by adding the player to a family called players. And actually, I think I'm going to change things by moving the behavior on the A direction behavior from the player object to the players family. This is just for organization mostly. I'm going to remove these actions as well. And I am going to remove the behavior from the player. And for this parent, not object, this is a family, but this is kind of like similarly, I mean, this is similar to an object, but there could be more than one object types in the same family. And for some reason, I just prefer to have a player object and the players family and have all the behaviors and instance variables and everything on the players family. So yeah, this is just an opinionated practice that I do. Okay, so I'm going to start by adding the A direction behavior onto the family. And this just means that it should work exactly the same. But I'm going to, okay, construct auto-saving is going on. I'm going to change things up a little right here because I do want the player to have a little instance variable which stores the direction of the player, the requested direction of the player in a variable, and then have a separate function essentially that takes this direction and then moves the player accordingly. So right now, if I run the game, nothing happens because there are no actions in the event sheet and the player's default controls are probably turned on. No, they're not because I added it again, so they are turned on. So now if I run the game, then nothing happens if I press the keys or the D-pad or anything. Okay. So what I want to do is to add a little instance variable called movement axis x. And this is going to be a number. This is just a normal variable that is on the object. And similarly, I'm going to say movement axis y. And these should change accordingly to how the input is happening. So right now, I want to change the variable. So for example, the movement axis x should be -1 if the player wants to move to the left. It should be 0 if you don't want the player to move either to the left or the right, and it should be 1 if you want the player to move to the right. Now with digital inputs like the D-pad and the keyboard, this just means that there's either -1, 0, or 1 in this variable. However, with the gamepad, you could also do something like, I don't know, -0.5 if you don't press the analog stick all the way to the left, just halfway, then the player should probably move to the left, but maybe slower. So you can have variable speed, which is nice. Right, okay, so how do we do that? At first, I think I'm going to put all of this into a custom action, which is essentially a function which belongs to one of the objects or object families. So I'm just going to select players, and I'm going to say handle input as the name of the function, which is functions and custom actions are essentially the same, but they behave a little bit differently in construct. I prefer to use custom actions wherever possible. So when I want a object to have a custom action, a function, then I use a custom action. And functions are just global functions, kind of like singletons, I guess, in other engines or something like that. I'm really talking out of my ass this time. Not so sure, but if you want a player to, for example, handle the input, then you should create a custom action, for example, named handle input, and move all of this right under this custom action. And inside the custom action, I can create a little variable, for example, axis X and axis Y, and set these accordingly to which buttons are pressed. And also in the end, I can pass these variables into the player's movement axis X and movement axis Y variables. Or I could also do something like not using local variables, but just write out changing these variables right here. Let me just show you, because this is getting not very tutorial-y, I guess. So at first I'm going to say player's movement set value and movement axis X variable should be reset to 0, and I'm going to do the same for the Y one as well. So these variables are reset, and this handle input function or custom action is going to run at every tick. So basically it's the same as the update method in Godot or something. I might be saying the wrong word, but this is something that happens at every frame. So if I set these variables to 0, I want to change the variables if I when the AD or W and S keys are pressed. So for the x-axis, which is the axis for the left and right movement, I want this to set the player's movement axis X to -1, or rather change it by subtracting 1 from it. So 0 will turn into -1. So I'm going to add an action here. Select players. I'm going to do this with the mouse for a change. And for handling variables, there's this add to and subtract from action, or you can use set value as well. I'm going to use subtract from and say movement axis X, and I'm going to subtract 1 from this. So this means that if I keep pressing A, then at every tick, at first the movement axis X value is reset to 0, but then if I press A, then 1 is going to be subtracted from this value. And right here, if I press D, I want to add 1 to this movement axis X variable. So this just means that if I press A, then the movement axis X will be -1, but if I press D as well, then it will stay at 0, because -1 plus 1, yeah, you get it. And I'm going to do exactly the same for the W and S, or the D-pad up and down events as well. So I'm just going to change this to movement axis Y and copy this, and there you go. Right, okay. And for the gamepad controls, I can probably say something like if the left analog x-axis is not equal to 1, which means that the analog stick is moved either to the left or the right, I can use the value of the x-axis to set this variable as well. So once again, I am going to set the value of this variable to gamepad.axis, and it has a few parameters. First, you have to specify which gamepad you're talking about. We're talking about the first one, so it has the index 0. And then there's another index for the axis, and it's also 0 indexed. So 0 means that the left analog x-axis is the one that you want. And this little system expression, as they call it in Construct, it's essentially a method or function. This just returns a number ranging from -100 to 100. And if the analog stick is centered, then it will return 0. So since this is on a -100 to 100 scale, I'm going to multiply it by 0.01. So it's on a -1 to 1 scale instead. And I'm going to copy this and have the same stuff happen for the y-axis. And in this case, I'm going to change this second parameter to 1, which means that on the first gamepad, I want the left analog's y-axis measured, essentially, then multiplied by 0.01. So now I have little instance variables which hold the values that should tell the player in which direction to move. So this handle input custom action is not running yet. And of course, no movement is happening yet, but soon it will. I'm going to add another custom action called, once again for the player, called just tick. And it will make sense in a second. I'm also going to add another event, which is under system. And I'm just going to start typing. So every tick is going to be the condition, which just means that this, whatever I put in here, should run at every frame of the game. So every tick is, once again, I think the update function in Godot, it runs all the time. So right here, I'm going to call players handle input at first. So this just means that the game runs this custom action, this function, at every frame first. And after that, I'm also going to run the tick custom action, which doesn't do anything yet, but I'm just going to move this to the top. So at first, at every tick, I'm going to call this and then this. This should handle the input by setting the movement axis X and Y variables to a number. And in tick, the actual movement should happen. And this will be done by using a action that is related to the A direction behavior. So I'm just going to say players. And there's this little set vector X and Y action. And simply I'm just going to say vector X should be the player's movement axis X value, but I'm also going to multiply it by the A direction behavior's maximum speed, which is right here. It's 200 and it's in pixels per second. So I'm just going to say players A direction max speed. And whatever I set up here will end up right here. So this will be multiplied by the requested movement axis, hopefully. If it's a negative value, then it means that it will move to the left because it will be multiplied by 200. So it's going to end up minus 200. If I press the D button, for example, then this will be 1. It will be multiplied by 200, so it will end up 200. If I don't press anything, then this will be 0. And this just means that the player won't move anywhere. And if I, for example, move the left analog stick to the left, but only halfway, then this will be minus 0.5 multiplied by 200 will end up minus 100. So this is how it should hopefully work. I'm just going to copy this, change the action to set vector Y instead of X, and change X right here to Y. So it hopefully works. I have zero idea if this is going to work, but I'm just going to run the game and check. So at first, let's see if keyboard input is happening. Okay, this is neat. As you can see, the acceleration and deceleration values are ignored in this case because so it has instant acceleration and deceleration because we are using the set vector action, but this is, I think, fine for the time being at least. Oh, and I also wanted to check the other inputs. So D-pad is still working. And also, look here, I can move in any direction, not just the 8 directions. And I can also change the speed by playing with the left analog stick. If I only move it a little bit, then it will move kind of slowly. And if I press it all the way, then it will move kind of fast. So yeah, this is exactly what I wanted. And let me just show you one thing and also check if everything works. So I think I mentioned that this browser object is useful if you want to log stuff to the console. So right now I'm going to add another action right here. And I just want to log the player's current speed to the console. It won't look really good, but yeah, for debugging purposes, this is fine. So under the browser object, there's this log action that you can select and just give it any message. And in this case, I want it to say player speed. And you can concatenate strings with the ampersand sign in construct. So although in JavaScript, you can do it with this, in construct, if you want to glue two strings together, you have to use the ampersand operator, I think. And so I just want to reference the player's direction behavior's speed property, which is calculated accordingly to the movement vector stuff that it's happening right above. So if I add this, start the game, and open up the console, there will be a bunch of messages here, hopefully, if I start moving around. But there isn't. Maybe I screwed something up with the... Okay, let me just check something. Oh, there are a bunch of stuff hidden, I think. This might be because I have this little number here. Okay, so the player speed is 0, and if I start moving the analog stick around, then as you can see, it logs a bunch of different values. So what I wanted to check, if I move it all the way to the right, for example, or the left, then it says 200, which is the maximum speed, which is cool. And if I move it, for example, to the up and left direction as well, then it also says 200, which means that it's working correctly. In some games, there could be issues by having input handled in a kind of a buggy way, which means that the player will move at a slower speed if you move in one of the diagonal directions. And I'm saying this because this is how, for example, one of the official construct examples work, the twin stick shooter one. So yeah, never mind. I'm just going to remove this. And now we have basic gamepad and keyboard movement input for the player, which is cool. So next step. I also want the player to be able to shoot, that's for sure. And I think I'm just going to add another instance variable to achieve this, which will hold an angle, I think. And it will be set to whatever angle the right analog stick is pointing at, if there's analog stick movement at all. Okay, so I'm going to add another instance variable for the player. I should call it shooting angle, for example, I think. It will be a number and it will be in degrees. But for this to work, I also want to have another instance variable called isShooting, for example. And this is going to be 0 by default, which means that the player is not shooting. But if the player presses, I don't know, another button, for example, one of the triggers, I think usually in twin stick shooters, this sort of thing happens, then the shooting will actually happen. And it's possible to use booleans in construct, but I don't really like using them for reasons that I'm not going to go into right now. So I'm just going to say that this should be a number, and it will be 0 if it's false, basically, and it will be 1 if it's true. And I'm going to set the value right here. So let's just do that. I'm going to add a new sub-event under the handle input custom action. I can do this by pressing B, which just creates a blank one, or you can also do it like this, of course. But I'm just going to create a blank one, and right here I'm going to check if the player is pressing, for example, the right or the left triggers. This is what I assign on the gamepad to the shooting action. So I'm going to say gamepad is button down of the first gamepad, which has the index 0, and I'm just going to select the left shoulder trigger. And I'm also going to convert this into an OR block and copy the condition. And for the second one, I'm going to change it to right shoulder trigger. So basically, the player, basically, the player can shoot either by pressing the left trigger or the right trigger. Also, I am going to add a button for now, so the player can shoot with the keyboard as well. So I'm just going to press C again to add another condition, and I'm going to say keyboard. Then I'm going to say key is down, and I'm just going to say space, for example. So the player can shoot by pressing space. However, the player will also need to have the angle specified either by the keyboard or using the mouse, and this is coming up in a few minutes. For now, I'm just going to say that this should happen. If any of these should happen, then the player's is shooting variable should be set to 1. Now, this is a good opportunity to go into macros, I think. And for macros, I'm also going to have a little organizational thing set up right here. So far there's only one event sheet, and it's getting, it's getting big. It's not that big, but at one point it will be kind of big. So I'm just going to create another event sheet. I'm going to name it V macros, or even better, I'm just going to grab my little template project, which already has a bunch of blank event sheets set up, and it has a little organizational system. So under event sheets in my template that I usually use, there are actions, events, functions, and values. These are subfolders, and they have a bunch of separate event sheets in it. So under values, there's an event sheet for storing constants. There's another event sheet called state, which holds variables that might change during the game's runtime. These are global variables, and for example, if I want to store the score or some kind of timer I want to be accessible by any part of the game, I create a global variable and put it in vState. And also there are macros. So what are macros? Macros are just global constants, so they can't have their value changed. And I usually prefix their name with something that refers to what kind of macro they are. And then after an underscore, I put a little name in it that will hopefully clarify what's their purpose. But at first, I'm just going to copy this values folder altogether and put it in my project right here. And I'm going to use the no and yes macros, which are just constants that have the 0 and 1 values assigned to them, right about here. So first, I'm going to reset the isShooting variable to 0 at every tick. So I'm just going to add an action here. Say players set value isShooting, and I could say no, or I could say 0, but I prefer to say no right here, which refers to this no constant or macro, which has the 0 value added to it. I just find this to be more readable. So if any of these conditions are met, I want the players, the players isShooting variable set to yes. So I'm just going to say players set value, which sets a value of an instance variable of the player object, and say isShooting yes, which is 1. And when the variable is set to 1, then something should happen right here. We don't have any projectiles yet, but I'm going to create one real quick. So I'm going to move back to the first layout called level. I'm going to create a new object, just like I created the player. This is also going to be a sprite. I'm just going to change the size to something kind of small, like 8 pixels by, I don't know, 2 pixels or maybe 4. I'm going to zoom in a little, and I'm just going to make it a little white rectangle, and that's it. So this is going to be the projectile, so I will name it accordingly. And also, this projectile is an object that should only spawn when the player is shooting. And in construct, this is a little tricky because I do need to have one instance of every object that I want to spawn during runtime. And literally everyone uses a special layout to store this little instance of each object that you don't want the game to have, for example, in the main layout that you're using, but you do want it to have some defaults. I'm just going to show you what I mean. I'm going to add a new event, a new layout, but only a layout. I'm going to set its size to the same as the viewport. It doesn't really matter anyway. And I'm going to select the projectile object, remove it by pressing Ctrl X, cutting it, and then I press Ctrl V on this event sheet, so it's moved right here. I'm going to have the same grid settings here as well. Okay, not that it matters. So the projectile sprite has a single instance in the second layout that I created, which I'm going to name to object templates. Right, okay. So this little sprite should act as a bullet, so it should move on their own when they are spawned. And for this, I'm going to utilize another behavior in construct called called bullet. Yeah. I'm going to add a new behavior, and under movements, there's the little bullet behavior. So the bullet behavior just makes something move in a direction at a speed. If I run this layout by pressing F5, then you can probably see that, yeah, this is how the bullet is moving at this point, the projectile sprite, I mean. And to change its speed, you could set something like, I don't know, higher value right here. This is once again in pixels per second. It's possible to have acceleration, and if you're doing something not top down but side view, then you could have gravity as well. So there's bullet drop, for example, but I don't want that because I'm making a top down game. You could also set it to have the angle set to the movement direction automatically. I'm going to check this. I'm just going to have this at the default value, which is checked. So right now, if I want to, whoops, I closed the layout. If I want the player to be able to shoot, I just need to add a condition under the tick custom action, which just checks if the is shooting variable is set to 1 or yes. And if it is, then the player should spawn a projectile and maybe have a little cooldown. So if you keep pressing space, for example, or any of the triggers on the gamepad, then there's a little delay between the spawns. So to achieve that, at first I'm going to add another behavior for the players, which is called timer, which is, I think, is the same in Godot as well. And there are timers in Godot. And there are one-off timers, and I don't know what's the other one called, so the repeating ones as well. It's essentially the same in construct. So for the players family, I'm going to add a timer behavior, which has no properties at all. And we're just going to start a little timer every time the bullet is spawned or the projectile is spawned. So under players, at first I'm just going to check the value of the is shooting variable, and if it's yes, then I want to have an action. I pressed A and say players, and I'm just going to say spawn another object, which is a handy expression, action, which spawns another object type, whatever you select right here. So I'm just going to select projectile. It asks you which layer to spawn it on. I'm going to go back here in a second. And it's also asking for an image point. 0 means that the origin of the parent sprite should be used, but there could be multiple image points for each sprite. I'm just going to leave it at 0 at this point. So you can probably press space to have a bunch of projectiles spawn at this point, but there's no timer yet. So let's just see what happens if I run the project. Okay, so if I press space, a bunch of little projectile sprites are spawning, and they're moving in whatever direction the player is facing in. And this spawn another object action has actually this behavior that if you are using the spawn another object action, this means that the parent object who's doing the spawning essentially, so their position and their current angle are inherited in the object that you are about to spawn, in this case the projectile. So this is why the angle was automatically set to whatever angle the player was in when I pressed space. So okay, the timer I really need, and for this I am going to add a little macro and show you why it's kind of important. So I'm just going to create a new global constant, which is going to act as a macro. It's going to be prefixed with the word timer, all caps, then have a little underscore, and I'm going to say shoot cooldown. And I'm also going to set it as the value. Not that it matters a lot, but it should have a distinct value. And for consistency, I just tend to do this. So this macro will be referenced right here. So I only want the player to shoot if they are pressing the button and the timer called shoot cooldown is not running. So I'm just going to add another condition right here. And in this case, I'm not going to set this to an OR block because I want both conditions to be met for the projectile spawning to run. Wasn't that a sentence? Okay, never mind. So players, right? I was at players and I'm adding a new condition. And there are a bunch of conditions, I mean two, for the timer behavior. One is timer running? And this is what I'm going to use right now. So to have a bunch of timers on an object, you have to name each timer. And this is called a tag in construct, and it could be a string. But I don't like using strings. I mean, I could do something like this, type cooldown, for example. And when I'm spawning a projectile, I can also start a timer on the player. Start timer, set the duration to, I don't know, 0.1 seconds. This is the timer's type, once or regular. So this is the one-off one. And have the text say something like cooldown. And if I run the game right now, then there should be a 0.1 second cooldown. Sorry, I forgot something. So now the condition says, is the cooldown timer running? But I want the opposite. If it's not running, and I'm pressing I to invert this condition, you can also do it with the mouse, by the way, like this. So I want the shooting, the spawning of the projectile happen if the player is pressing the shoot button and if the timer is not running. So now it should work better, hopefully. Okay, so there's now a little delay between the spawning of the projectile objects. However, I don't like using this, because if I ever change my mind, if I want to change the tag to something else, then I need to essentially find all occurrences of this word in the whole project file and type something else in. And if I use a macro, I can just do it at the macro and not at each instance. So instead of using a literal string or a string literal, I'm going to say timer shoot cooldown, which is a string, a constant, but I can change its value at any one point by changing it right here. Or if I want to rename it, for example, to just simply, or what if I want to name it fire cooldown? I totally could, and just for good measure, I'm also changing the value. So I renamed this macro, and boom, it's renamed here as well. So refactoring is totally automatic in construct if you're renaming variables, for example, or if you're renaming functions, custom actions. You don't have to worry about replacing all the references to that variable, constant, custom action, function, or whatever. It's all automatic, which is kind of nice, I think. So I'm just going to save and see if it's running fine. So right now, if I press space while moving, then the shooting happens. I'm also going to check if it's working on the gamepad. Okay, my gamepad was a little in standby. it's definitely working. I can press either or both of the triggers and the shooting is happening right now in the direction of the player, which is neat. So yeah, let me just check the to-do. So basic 2D top-down shooter, player can move and shoot in different directions. This is basically, I could say, done. I mean, touch support is not there yet, but this is in a separate item anyway, so yeah. However, the problem is that with the keyboard, I can't specify a different angle for the shooting. Right now, it's only possible to shoot in the direction the player is facing, and it's essentially the same with the gamepad as well, because we are not utilizing the right analog yet. But let's just change that as well. So I want to add another sub-condition, I mean sub-event right here. So this is where the movement is happening. I'm just going to add a comment called movement. I'm just going to say digital movement, because these events are handling the key-based movement inputs, and these events are going to say analog movement, because these are analog stick-based movements. So this is shooting, and right here I'm going to say analog aiming. And right now, I think I'm going to copy this and this as well. So I'm making an event that checks the right analog on the gamepad, either the X or the Y axis. And if either of them are not equal to 0, this means that I'm moving the analog stick somewhere. If they are both 0, I don't want this event to run, because this just means that the player is not aiming with the right analog. So if either of these, however, are not 0, this means that the analog stick is in a non-centered position. So in this case, I'm going to add an action and say players set value. And I think I already added this, yeah, shooting angle instance variable. And I'm just going to say this should be the angle, whatever angle the player's right analog stick is at. And for this, I'm going to use a system expression called angle, which is a typical function in all game engines. You can just give it two positions, a pair of X and Y coordinates, and an angle will be calculated from those two. So I'm just going to say 0 and 0 as the first position, and the second one is going to be gamepad axis of the first gamepad, which has the 0 index, and the right analog X axis, which is referenced by passing 2 as the second parameter, and do exactly the same with the right analog stick's Y axis. So this should calculate the angle that the right analog stick is facing. Right. And when I'm doing the projectile spawning, I probably want to change the angle of the projectile to something else. And just so there's something new here as well, I am going to replace this spawn another object action of the player and instead use the system action called create object. So create object can basically spawn something out of the blue. It does exactly the same as the spawn another object action, but this does not have a kind of a parent or anything. I can just select any object, say a projectile, for example, spawn it on one of the layers. I still don't have a macro for the main layer, but I will add it later. And you can just specify the X and Y positions. You don't have the option to specify one if you're using the spawn another object action, because it automatically inherits the spawner object's position. But in this case, I'm just going to say players.x and players.y. But this also means that I have to specify the angle of the newly created projectile instance. And for this, I'm going to add another action and say projectile set angle. And I'm just going to say players dot shooting angle. This is the variable that holds the angle that the player should shoot at. Okay, this is not great because this does not work with the keyboard yet, but I'm just going to run it and check if it's working with the gamepad. So I'm going to press the analog stick in directions and hold down the trigger. And as you can see, you can aim in any direction and shoot regardless of the movement angle, which is nice, which is basic twin stick behavior at this point. So you can move in one direction and shoot in a completely different one. Neat. Now if I shoot by pressing space, as you can see, the angle is set to the last angle that the analog stick was at, the right one I mean, which is not great, so let's just fix that. So for this, I think I want to have the option for the player, if they don't want to use a mouse for some reason, I just want the option to be, I think I'm going to say J, K, L, and I keys should work as the aiming stuff. Oof, this wasn't a sentence either. So I want the player to be able to aim by pressing J, K, L, and I, just like a WASD situation. Okay, so I'm going to copy this and start with, once again, the up direction and do something like this. So I should shoot upwards, K should shoot downwards, J should be the left direction, and L should be the right one. And for this to work, I will need to do something like the movement axis stuff. However, I think I'm going to utilize a little local variable because I don't really want to store the shooting axis on the player. I'm just going to create a local variable called shooting axis x, set it to 0 by default, copy it, name it accordingly, so there are an x and y version. And right here I'm going to, and they are both initialized at 0, so I'm just going to do something that is similar to here, although in this case these are just local variables, they are not related to the player. So I'm just going to say under system, I'm going to use the subtract from action to subtract 1 from the y-axis if the player is pressing I, which means that they should shoot upwards. I'm going to do exactly the same for K, but in this case I don't want the subtract, I want the add to happen. And essentially the same should happen with the J and L conditions, but in this case I want the X shooting axis to change by 1 in either direction. So okay, I guess this should work. And I also want the shooting angle to be set accordingly. So the order of things happening is actually a bit important here. I'm going to add a comment that says digital aiming, and after the shooting axis y and x values are set, I actually want something like this to happen right here to specify the shooting angle variable if any of these keys are pressed. So I'm just going to replace this with how did I name it? Shooting axis, right? Shooting axis X and shooting axis Y. I think this should work, but let me just check quickly. It doesn't, but this is because I'm not setting the isShooting variable anywhere. Now let's just think about this. Okay. If any of these buttons are pressed, then the player should probably shoot. Although they should only shoot if either the X or Y axis variables are non-zero. So I'm just going to add the action that sets the isShooting instance variable of the player to yes. But this should only happen if shooting axis X is non-zero, or, and I'm going to change the event block once again to or type, or the shooting axis Y variable is non-zero. So if the player is pressing at least one button out of the I, J, K, and L buttons, this should probably happen. Although if they are pressing J and L at the same time, then the shooting axis X will stay 0. So yeah, this is also kind of handled. Let's just try it. Okay, so I can move in one direction and shoot in another with the keyboard. And I can also, of course, only shoot in the 8 directions, but this is fine, I think. I don't think any players will probably use this input method, but I like to offer a bunch of options, so why not? Most players will probably just use the mouse. Okay, I'm going to save this and upload the new version to itch. And then possibly make a new version of the project as well. I'm just going to overwrite the zip file that I exported and run the little script just like the first time. And I'm going to check if the new version is up on itch at this point. Let's just see if it's, yeah, it is completed. I'm going to refresh the page. Yeah, it should be up there. Okay, keyboard input works all right, I think. I can move in one direction, shoot another. Let's just try the gamepad one as well. It looks like it's working fine as well. I can move in any direction. I can press trigger to shoot. Although if I don't touch the right analog stick and press trigger, this just means that it will shoot in the last direction that I specified using the analog stick. I don't know if I want this to happen. Although I'm not even sure if I want the player to press the trigger, because essentially if they are pressing the right analog stick in any direction, they want to shoot. So I don't know if the trigger button press should be required anyway. Decisions. We'll come back to that. Right. So one thing that is missing at this point is mouse input. So I'm just going to handle that as well. So the player can use the WASD keys or the keyboard, the arrow keys and the mouse to move and shoot. So in this case, I mentioned the arrow keys, but I'm not handling them, not yet anyway. I'm just going to add a few more conditions for this part. I'm going to add the arrow keys as well. So for S or down, okay, this is the left direction and this one is the right direction. I'm just going to quickly check if now I'm able to move the player with the arrow keys. Yeah, indeed. And I also want to handle the mouse stuff. So handling the mouse, this shouldn't be too hard, I think. Essentially, I need to have a shoot button, which is probably going to be the left mouse click. So this is where shooting happens if I'm using a gamepad or the keyboard. I'm going to remove the space stuff because I already handled the directional shooting right here with I, K, J, and L. So this should probably, yeah, I'm just going to add another sub-event right here. Shooting with the gamepad is happening here. I'm also going to add another condition to this blank sub-event, which just utilizes the mouse. And If the mouse button is down is the condition that I'm looking for. I can specify which mouse button I want to monitor. In this case, I'm just going to go with the left click. So if the player is pressing the left mouse button, then something should happen. I definitely want the e-shooting variable set to yes, because yeah, this is important. And I also want to calculate which direction the mouse cursor is at in reference to the player. So the shooting angle should be set right here. I'm going to copy this action, and I'm going to say set shooting angle and use the same angle system expression here as well, but change the contents. So I want the angle to be calculated from the player's position to the mouse cursor's position. And this is quite easy actually. I'm just going to say players.x and players.y. And then I'm lazily going to say mouse.x and mouse.y. And by lazy, I mean that this might have an issue if I have multiple layers and possibly if I ever move to a 3D camera. But right now it should probably work. So I'm pressing the mouse button, the left one, and as you can see, shooting is already happening in direction of the mouse cursor. And I can just move the player and keep the mouse at the same position and the shooting will still happen. But the angle will be always calculated based on the player's position and the mouse cursor's position. So yeah, this is, I guess, handling the keyboard, mouse, and gamepad inputs at this point. So where was I? Yeah, keyboard only, mouse and keyboard and gamepad twin stick is already working. Also the gamepad's D-pad is also handled. So the only thing that is missing is the touchscreen input method. Right. I think I'm going to skip that for now, but I might add it another time. I'm just going to save the project as a new project file. By the way, Construct is making these little single project files if I save them like this. But there's also an option to have a project folder, very similarly on to how Gamedev works, for example. So there's a project folder and a bunch of files inside it. And this C3P extension is actually not a Star Wars reference, it's a zip file. And it's literally the same as a project folder, it's just compressed into a zip file. So every time I save a project using the save as single file option, a zip is created with the project folder's contents in it. And the other one is the actual project folder type, which might be a little faster. I don't know. I'm using the C3P single project file usually because of reasons I'm not going to go into, but it's related to Dropbox not handling emoji file names. So yeah. Okay, I'm just going to say stream game -v2 as I'm going to bump up the version number to 2 as well. And I kind of have streamer brain at this point, so I think I might stop here. But I'm going to make one final export for the web and upload it to itch. Yeah, I'm going to raid the Tuna the Nerds right now, I think. Although, how many viewers do I have? It's just you, Flavius, I think, but yeah. Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, I do have streamer brain, so yeah, I'm not at 100%, and I don't think I want to continue right now. Although, what else is there? Yeah, weapons, enemies, yeah. I think I'm going to pause right now, and hopefully I can either continue tomorrow or on Monday. But right now I'm just going to... Did I run the script? I'm not sure. Let me just check. If the new version of the project is up, it should be. You got a portal working. This is neat. do send me a video if you want on Discord. I'm going to check it in a few minutes because I think I'm going to end it right here. Okay, so I think this is fine. Basic player controller. So except for the touch input, this is mostly what I want the game to have. So I don't think there's anything missing at this point, although the shooting cooldown will have to be refactored and moved somewhere else, because right now I'm just saying that it should be 0.1 second every time, but for testing purposes this is fine. So thank you for watching, and if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to check back later, because I will probably upload the second part of this project later. So for now, I'm going to call it a day, and see you around next time. And I'm raiding the 2 nerdy nerds if you are watching on itch. So I mean Twitch. Yeah, I always get those confused. So okay, I saved, I uploaded, everything is fine. Yeah, see you around. Bye bye.